The sun was slowly dipping behind the dusty hills of a small Texas town. Chuck Norris drove his old pickup along the quiet highway, his eyes distant, lost in memories of a life that once moved faster than a bullet. Fame, fortune, glory, he'd tasted it all. But now, in the silence of retirement, one ache refused to fade. The pain of never becoming a father. Years of training his body to fight any enemy couldn't prepare him for that kind of emptiness. He and his wife had tried everything, prayers, doctors, even adoption, but fate had other plans. Still, Chuck believed that everything happened for a reason. He just didn't know yet that reason was waiting for him, standing barefoot in the dust. As he drove past an old construction site on the edge of town, something caught his eye. A group of children, small, thin, covered in dust, hauling heavy bricks under the blazing sun. His hands froze on the steering wheel. "Kids?" he whispered to himself. He pulled over. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. These weren't workers, they were victims. Some couldn't have been older than 12, and among them one girl stood out, maybe 14, wearing torn clothes, her face smeared with dirt but her eyes sharp, filled with exhaustion and silent fear. Chuck watched as a loud man, the site supervisor, barked orders, waving a stick threateningly. The girl stumbled, the bricks crashing to the ground. The man shouted, "Pick them up or you're not getting paid." Something in Chuck snapped. That calm, disciplined warrior spirit he'd carried for decades suddenly burned with purpose. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. The workers glanced up, whispering. The supervisor scowled, annoyed. "Sir?" Chuck said firmly. "Why are these children working here?" The man sneered. "Not your business, old man." "Keep walking." Chuck's gaze hardened. "It became my business the moment I saw a child being treated like this." The man chuckled mockingly. "You some kind of hero?" Chuck's silence said more than words ever could. The same presence that once froze enemies in their tracks now filled the air with quiet authority. Even the children stopped moving, watching him. He turned to the girl. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Maria." Her voice was barely audible, weak, tired, like she hadn't spoken kindly to in years. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. "Gone," she said. "They told me to work so I can eat." Chuck's heart broke. He'd met soldiers, criminals, and champions, but none as brave as this child standing in front of him with trembling hands. He knelt down, lowering himself to her level. "You shouldn't be here, Maria. You deserve school, not this." The girl looked away. "School's for people with money." Chuck stood up slowly, jaw tightening. "Not if I can help it." The supervisor stepped forward, annoyed. "Look, mister, I don't know who you think you are." Chuck's eyes met his. Cold, calm, legendary. "I'm someone who doesn't walk away from injustice," he said. The man froze, realizing exactly who he was talking to. The murmurs among the older workers confirmed it. That's Chuck Norris, but for Chuck, this wasn't about fame. It was about purpose. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring inside. Not anger, not sadness, but destiny. He didn't know it yet, but rescuing that one girl would fill a void deeper than any battlefield scar. No one could have guessed that this single moment would change both their lives forever. Dust swirled around as the wind picked up across the half-built site. The children looked at Chuck with cautious eyes, some hopeful, others afraid. The foreman, a stocky man with a beer belly and an attitude bigger than his paycheck, crossed his arms and smirked. "Listen, old man," he said, chewing gum loudly. "These kids work for a few hours, make a little money. No one's complaining except you." Chuck's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. The kind of calm that usually meant someone was about to regret their choices. "Child labor is illegal," he said firmly. "And morally wrong," the man scoffed. "What are you, a cop?" "No," Chuck said, stepping closer. "Just someone who still believes right is right." The man's grin faltered as he finally looked Chuck in the eyes, and recognized that face. For a moment, his bravado cracked. "Wait a second. Aren't you—" "Yes," Chuck interrupted, his tone even colder. "And if you don't shut this place down right now, I'll make sure the authorities do it for you." The foreman's smirk vanished. He muttered something under his breath and backed off a step, but not far enough to show weakness. Chuck turned toward the children again. Most of them froze, tools in hand, unsure whether to stop working. He raised his hand gently. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said. No one's going to hurt you." The youngest ones looked at each other, uncertain. But Maria, she just stared at him, confused, exhausted, and untrusting. Years of neglect had taught her that no adult ever showed kindness without wanting something in return. Chuck could see it in her eyes, that mix of fear and disbelief. He'd seen that same look before in the eyes of soldiers rescued from war zones, people who'd forgotten what safety even felt like. He took a step closer, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Maria, I'm not here to take anything from you," he said softly. "I'm here to help." Her lips trembled. "They'll hurt me if I stop working," she whispered. Chuck shook his head. "Not while I'm here." He stood, pulling out his phone. With one hand, he called local child welfare authorities, describing what he was seeing. The workers nearby began whispering nervously. The foreman tried to protest, but Chuck raised his hand. "Don't," he warned. "You've said enough." 10 minutes later, a small crowd began forming at the edge of the site. Curious locals and a few bystanders who had started filming the scene on their phones. One of them whispered, "That's Chuck Norris, right?" Another replied, "What's he doing here?" The camera phones turned on him, but Chuck ignored them completely. His focus stayed on Maria, who was still clutching a piece of broken brick in her hand, like a child holding onto a shield. He reached out and gently took the brick from her, setting it down. "You don't have to carry that anymore," he said softly. For a second, the girl's expression shifted, confusion giving way to a flicker of trust. The distant wail of sirens grew louder. Police cars and a child protection van pulled up, kicking up clouds of dust. Officers stepped out, immediately recognizing Chuck. "Mr. Norris?" one said, surprised. Chuck nodded. "These kids need help. Now." Within minutes, the children were gathered safely away from the site. The foreman argued and shouted, but his words faded under the weight of official authority and the silent judgment of the crowd watching. Maria stood apart, hugging herself. When one of the officers asked if she wanted to come with them, she hesitated. Her eyes went to Chuck as if asking silently, "Can I trust them?" He nodded reassuringly. "They'll take care of you, Maria, I promise." Her voice was small but steady. Will I see you again?" Chuck felt his throat tighten, something he hadn't felt in years. "Yes," he said quietly. "You will." The officers led the children to the van, one by one. As the vehicles drove away, Chuck stood watching until they disappeared beyond the hills. The wind blew dust across the empty site, now silent except for the creaking of rusted metal. For the first time in a long while, he felt something powerful stir inside. Not anger, not sorrow, but purpose, the kind of purpose that gives life meaning again. He walked back to his truck, but before getting in, he looked at the abandoned site one last time. His mind replayed Maria's trembling voice. "They told me to work so I can eat." He gripped the steering wheel tightly. That voice wouldn't leave his mind. Not that night. Not ever. As the sun set behind the mountains, Chuck's phone buzzed. It was a call from the Child Welfare Office. The voice on the other end said, "Mr. Norris, we've placed the children in temporary care. But one of them, the girl named Maria, hasn't said a single word since she got here. She keeps asking if you're coming back." Chuck stared out at the horizon, his reflection visible in the windshield. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," he said firmly. "Have you ever seen someone take a stand against injustice? And tell me, which country and city are you watching this story from?" That night, as the moon rose over the quiet Texas plains, Chuck Norris sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at a photo of himself and his wife. He whispered softly, "Maybe God didn't give me a child because he was saving me for this moment." He didn't know yet that rescuing one girl would open a door to the miracle he'd been waiting for all his life. And what happened next would change everything. The next morning, the sky was painted with gold and orange. Chuck Norris was already on the road before sunrise. The sound of his pickup truck echoed through the sleepy Texas highway as he drove. Toward the Child Protection Center, he wasn't sure why he was going. All he knew was that he couldn't stop thinking about Maria's eyes. That hollow sadness, that quiet strength. It reminded him of the loneliness he and his wife had faced for years. The silence of a home that had never heard a child's laughter. When he arrived, the center's director, a kind woman in her 50s named Ellen, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Norris, thank you for coming. The kids are adjusting. Most of them. But Maria, she's different. Chuck followed her through the hallway. Children played, laughed, and ate breakfast, but Maria sat apart near a window. Her small frame seemed even smaller against the sunlight streaming in. She was drawing something. A rough sketch of a man standing in front of a building site. When she saw Chuck, her eyes widened and the pencil slipped from her hand. "Hey, partner," Chuck said softly, kneeling beside her. "You're getting good at drawing." She didn't say anything, just stared at him as if to make sure he was real. Ellen smiled. "She hasn't spoken a word to anyone since we brought her here. But maybe she's been waiting for you." Chuck nodded slightly. "Can we talk alone?" Ellen agreed and stepped aside. Chuck sat across from Maria at the small wooden table. "I told you I'd come back," he said. Her lips quivered, and for the first time a faint smile touched her face. "You did," she whispered. Chuck felt a lump in his throat. "I always keep my word." He noticed the bandage on her hand, a small cut from working at the site. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "A little," she replied, "but not as much as before." He smiled gently. "That's good. Because pain fades, Maria. It always does. You just have to give it time." She looked at him for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Why did you help me?" Chuck leaned back. The question hit him deeper than he expected. "Because a long time ago," he said slowly, "I prayed for a child. But it never happened. Maybe I was supposed to find you instead." Tears welled up in her eyes. She lowered her head, whispering, "Nobody's ever said something like that to me before." Chuck reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers. "Then it's about time someone did." A few days later, Chuck visited again and again after that. Each visit, Maria opened up a little more. She started smiling, then laughing, and even helping other children. It was as if a light had been turned back on inside her. Ellen pulled Chuck aside one afternoon. "She's becoming a different child," she said. "You've given her something she's never had before, and security." Chuck looked at Maria playing in the garden. "She gave me something too," he murmured.
Hope. Weeks passed.
The case of the illegal labor site made headlines. Authorities thanked Chuck publicly for his intervention. But he didn't care about fame, only about the little girl who now called him Mr. Chuck and waited for his visits with excitement. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Maria said, "They told me I might go to a foster family soon." Chuck's heart skipped a beat. "That's good, right?" he asked gently. She looked down at her shoes. "Yeah, but I was hoping maybe..." She paused, struggling with the words. "Maybe I could stay with you?" The air seemed to freeze. Chuck felt something deep inside shift, a feeling both terrifying and beautiful. "Maria, that's not simple," he said softly. "Adoption takes time." "There are laws, processes," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "I don't care how long it takes. I'll wait." Chuck looked at her fragile, innocent face, and he knew right then that his life had changed forever. He smiled. "Then I guess I'll start the paperwork." Maria's eyes filled with tears of joy, and she hugged him tightly. For a man who had faced every kind of battle, that moment and that tiny embrace was the most powerful victory of his life. Months went by. The process was long and complicated, but Chuck never gave up. Every signature, every interview, every sleepless night, he handled it all. Because this time, he was fighting for something that truly mattered. When the final approval came, the judge looked at him and said, "Mr. Norris, you've been through many roles in life, and soldier, actor, hero. But today you become something even greater. A father." Chuck's eyes glistened. He turned to Maria, who was holding a small teddy bear in her arms, and said with a trembling voice, "Ready to go home, kiddo?" She grinned. Home. That evening they drove home together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Maria rested her head on Chuck's shoulder as he drove. For the first time in years, the silence inside his truck wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. He thought about the irony of it all. He had spent his life breaking bones and fighting battles. But the fight that truly changed him was the one for a child's heart. As they reached the ranch, Maria ran to the porch and gasped at the horses grazing nearby. "It's beautiful," she shouted. Chuck laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that hadn't left his chest in years. "It's all yours now," he said. "Welcome home, Maria." And in that golden sunset, the world seemed right again. The man who thought he'd never be a father had found his daughter, but fate wasn't done writing their story yet. Because what came next was the miracle no one saw coming. The mornings at Chuck Norris's ranch were always quiet, except now. The sound of laughter, soft footsteps, and a teenage girl's excited chatter filled the air like music. Maria had been living with Chuck for 3 months. Each day was a new adventure, feeding the horses, learning to cook pancakes, helping Chuck with the garden, and asking a million curious questions about life. For the first time in years, Chuck's home felt alive. The echo of emptiness had vanished, replaced by warmth, laughter, and the soft hum of family. But beneath the surface, Chuck still wrestled with something: fear. He'd been strong his entire life. He could face 10 opponents without blinking. But now the thought of losing Maria terrified him. The adoption papers were done, yes, but what if fate took her away? One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Maria spoke softly. "Mr. Chuck, do you ever miss having your own child?" Chuck turned toward her, his rugged face lit by the fading orange glow. "You mean a child by blood?" Maria nodded. He smiled sadly. "I used to. For a long time that was my biggest pain, but not anymore." She tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "being a father isn't about blood. It's about love, and I've got plenty of that." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Then I guess I'm lucky you found me." Chuck smiled, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "No, Maria, I'm the lucky one." The next few weeks were full of small miracles. Maria started attending school again, her first real classroom in years. The teachers were amazed by her discipline and quick learning. She told them proudly that her dad trained her to never give up. At home, Chuck taught her martial arts. Not for fighting, but for focus, balance, and respect. Watching her practice punches in the backyard reminded him of his own childhood and how far he'd come. One morning, Maria accidentally broke a flower pot while training. She looked terrified, waiting for him to be angry. Instead, Chuck laughed. "You think a pot can scare me? I've faced Bruce Lee." Maria giggled, her fear vanishing instantly. That laughter. That was the sound Chuck didn't know his soul had been waiting for all these years. But life, as Chuck knew too well, doesn't stay peaceful for long. One afternoon, he got a call from Ellen, the woman who'd helped him with Maria's case. "Chuck, we've got a situation," she said, her tone uneasy. His gut tightened. "What kind of situation?" "It's Maria's uncle. He just surfaced, says he's her last living relative, and he's demanding custody." Chuck froze. The words hit like a blow. "He what?" "He's claiming she was taken without consent," Ellen continued. "Legally, he has a case to make, unless we can prove he's unfit." Chuck clenched his jaw. Where was he when she was working 12 hours a day carrying bricks? Where was he when she was starving? "I know," Ellen said softly. "But the law doesn't always care about morality. It cares about proof." Chuck's silence was heavy. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, and not in a fight but in a courtroom. He didn't tell Maria that night. She was too happy humming while helping him cook. But inside, Chuck's heart ached. He knew what losing her would mean. It would break him in ways no battle ever could. A few days later, the uncle showed up. He was a rough-looking man with greedy eyes and a smug smile. He came to the ranch with a lawyer, demanding that Maria pack her things. Maria froze when she saw him. "Uncle Roberto?" Chuck stepped between them immediately. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said firmly. The man sneered. "You think because you're famous the law doesn't apply to you? She's my family. I decide what happens to her. Family?" Chuck's voice was low and steady. "You used her like a slave. You don't get to use that word." The lawyer interjected. "Mr. Norris, if you interfere with custody proceedings..." Chuck's eyes narrowed. "You can tell the court I'll be there. But she's staying right here until a judge says otherwise." The man laughed mockingly. "We'll see about that." As they left, Maria ran to Chuck, trembling. "Please don't let him take me," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her. "Not while I'm breathing," he promised. That night, Chuck sat alone on the porch, the moonlight falling over the fields. He hadn't felt this angry in years. Not the kind of anger that comes from insult or injury, but the kind that rises when someone threatens what you love most. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "God, I don't ask for much. But please, and don't let her go back to that life." At that moment, the door creaked open. Maria stepped out barefoot, wearing her blanket like a cape. "Can't sleep either?" Chuck asked softly. She shook her head. "I'm scared." Chuck smiled gently and motioned for her to sit beside him. "You remember what I told you when I rescued you?" She nodded. "That pain fades, if you give it time." He looked at her and said, "So does fear, and we'll face this one together." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Promise?" Chuck's voice was steady. "Promise." As dawn broke, Chuck stood watching the sunrise, determination burning in his eyes. He'd faced countless enemies in his life, but this fight was different. This wasn't about winning a title or earning respect. This was about protecting his daughter, and the world was about to see just how unstoppable a father's love could be. The courthouse was silent except for the echo of footsteps. Chuck Norris walked down the long hallway, his boots striking the marble floor like a metronome of determination. He wasn't the invincible action hero the world knew. Today, he was something far stronger. A father. Maria walked beside him, holding his hand tightly. She wore a simple blue dress and clutched her little sketchbook, the one she always carried since the day she was rescued. Her eyes were anxious but full of trust. "Everything's gonna be okay," Chuck said gently. She nodded, though he could see the fear in her trembling fingers. As they entered the courtroom, the uncle, Roberto, was already there, sitting smugly with his lawyer. His expensive suit couldn't hide the greed in his eyes. He looked at Chuck and smirked. "Didn't think you'd actually show up." Chuck ignored him and led Maria to their seats. He'd faced men like Roberto before, men who used power to control, who mistook cruelty for strength. But he also knew one truth: real strength never needs to shout. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The proceedings began. Roberto's lawyer spoke first. "Your Honor, my client is the girl's only surviving relative. He has the legal right to custody and intends to provide her with a stable home environment." Chuck's lawyer, Ellen, yes, the same Ellen who once ran the Child Protection Center, stood to respond. "Your Honor, the man sitting across from us didn't provide Maria with a home. He provided her with forced labor. My client, Mr. Norris, rescued her from that abuse and gave her love, education, and safety." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Roberto, is this true? Was the child working under your supervision?" Roberto leaned forward. "She helped with chores. Everyone in our community works. It builds character." Chuck's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Ellen continued. "Your Honor, Maria was found lifting concrete bricks under the sun. She was starved, bruised, and afraid. We have photographic evidence and medical reports." The judge flipped through the documents, his expression hardening. "I see." Roberto's lawyer tried to twist the narrative. "Mr. Norris may mean well, but he's an aging celebrity. How can he raise a teenage girl on his own?" Chuck finally stood, calm but commanding. "Your Honor, I may not be young, but I've spent my life protecting people. From bullies, from corruption, from pain. And I'll protect her with everything I've got." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked momentarily moved. Maria squeezed his hand. Then came the most emotional moment. The judge called Maria to the stand. She looked terrified, glancing at Chuck for reassurance. He nodded. "Just tell the truth, sweetheart. You've got this." Maria took a deep breath and walked up. Her small voice filled the room. "When I lived with my uncle, I worked every day. I was scared all the time. Nobody talked to me unless they were angry." She looked at Chuck. "But when Mr. Chuck found me, he didn't just save me. He made me feel like I mattered." Her voice cracked, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I never had a father, but now I do." Even the court reporter paused for a moment, swallowing hard. The judge leaned forward. "Maria, are you saying you wish to remain with Mr. Norris?" She nodded, wiping her tears. "Yes, sir. He's my family." Chuck's eyes glistened, but he stood tall, silent, strong, proud. Roberto's lawyer tried to object, but the room had shifted. No argument could stand against that kind of truth. After a long pause, the judge sighed. "The evidence is clear. Mr. Roberto, your negligence and exploitation of this child disqualify you from guardianship. The court hereby grants full and permanent custody of Maria to Mr. Charles Norris." The gavel struck. Maria gasped. Then she ran and not walked on straight into Chuck's arms. He knelt and hugged her tightly as the courtroom burst into quiet applause. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. Chuck's voice cracked. "No, we did it." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Chuck didn't stop for cameras. He just lifted Maria up, twirling her once like a real father would. Her laughter filled the air, pure and free. Ellen smiled from the steps. "You really did it, Chuck. You gave her a new life." Chuck looked at Maria. "She gave me one too." That night at the ranch, the stars seemed brighter than ever. Maria sat on the porch sketching. Chuck joined her with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "What are you drawing tonight?" he asked. She smiled. "Us. You're teaching me how to punch him, but I made you taller," Chuck chuckled. "Taller? I like your version better already." Maria leaned her head on his shoulder. "Dad, yeah, I prayed every night for someone to save me." "I didn't think it would be you." Chuck's eyes softened. "I prayed too, kiddo. For a child. Guess God decided we both needed each other." For a moment, the world felt perfectly still. The pain of the past, the battles, the loneliness, all of it faded under the soft Texas moonlight. As the night deepened, Chuck looked out across the ranch, his land, his home, his peace. But deep down he felt something more, a quiet whisper from fate. Because this story wasn't over something extraordinary, something miraculous. It was about to happen, and it would change their lives forever. The weeks after the coup, custody battle were like a new dawn for Chuck Norris and Maria. No more fear, no more court hearings, no more nightmares of losing her. Just life, simple, peaceful, and full of laughter. Maria started calling him Dad more often now, sometimes playfully, sometimes in the quietest, most tender way that melted his heart every single time. Chuck found himself waking up earlier than ever, just to make her pancakes or drive her to school, or listen to her talk about her day. He'd fought countless battles in his life, but this, watching a child heal, was the greatest victory of them all. One chilly evening, Chuck sat by the fireplace reading when Maria came running in, her sketchbook in hand. "Dad, guess what?" she said, her eyes glowing. Chuck smiled. "Let me guess, another straight-A report card." She giggled. "No better. My school's holding a charity fair next week for orphans and kids in need. I told them we could help." Chuck looked up from his book, intrigued. "We?" Maria nodded eagerly. "You can teach self-defense to the kids, and I can sell my drawings. The money will go to the shelter." Chuck chuckled. "You've got a big heart, kiddo." Maria grinned. "I learned from you." He paused for a second, his eyes glistening. "No," he said softly. "You reminded me what a real heart looks like." That night, after Maria went to bed, Chuck sat on the porch staring at the stars, something he'd done for years when the pain of infertility haunted him. But this time, it was different. He wasn't asking why anymore. He was thanking the heavens for what he already had. As the wind rustled through the trees, he whispered, "You gave me what I needed, even when I didn't know how to ask for it. Thank you." He went to bed with a peace he hadn't felt in decades. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Chuck's wife, who had been living separately for a while due to his filming schedule and her work, came to visit. She hadn't met Maria yet. The moment she stepped into the house, Maria ran up shyly, clutching her sketchbook. "Hi, Mrs. Norris," she said politely. "I'm Maria." Chuck's wife, Rebecca, smiled warmly. "So you're the one who changed my husband's life." Maria's cheeks flushed. "He changed mine first." As the two got to know each other, something beautiful began to grow. A family bond that felt destined. Rebecca adored Maria instantly, helping her bake cookies and listening to her stories about school and art. Later that night, as they sat together by the fire, Rebecca took Chuck's hand. "You know," she said softly, "for the first time in a long time, this house feels alive." Chuck nodded. "She's the miracle we didn't know we were waiting for." But fate wasn't done surprising them. A month later, Rebecca went to the doctor for a routine checkup. When she came home, her face was pale, but her eyes were wide with disbelief. "Chuck," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You need to sit down." He frowned, setting down his coffee. "What's wrong?" Tears welled in her eyes as she handed him a small white envelope, an ultrasound image. Chuck blinked, confused. "Is this?" She nodded, her voice breaking. "I'm pregnant." He froze. For a second, he couldn't breathe. It had been impossible. The doctors had said years ago that they couldn't have children. He looked at her again, then at the image in his hands, his heart pounding like thunder. Rebecca, after all this time? She nodded through tears. After all this time? Chuck sat there in stunned silence. The man who had spent years fighting every kind of battle suddenly found himself completely disarmed by a miracle. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he walked outside, staring at the sky. Maria joined him quietly. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked. He smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Something amazing just happened." "What?" she asked curiously. Chuck knelt, holding her small hands in his. "You're going to be a big sister." Maria blinked. "Wait, you mean—" He nodded, laughing through tears. "Your mom's having a baby." Her eyes widened and then she screamed with joy, jumping into his arms. "I'm going to be a sister." Chuck held her tight, laughing as tears rolled down his face. Looks like the family just got a little bigger. The next few days were filled with celebration. Maria helped decorate the house, painted a small welcome baby banner, and told everyone she met that her dad was going to be a father again. But one night, as they all sat together by the fire, Maria turned to Chuck and said something that made his heart stop. "Dad, maybe I was your miracle first so your second one could find you." Chuck stared at her, completely speechless. The wisdom in her young voice was beyond her years. He pulled her close and whispered, "No, Maria, you are my miracle. Everything else is just proof that love never runs out." That night, Chuck sat between Rebecca and Maria, watching them laugh together, one holding a mug of cocoa, the other sketching baby names in her notebook. He thought about everything, the pain, the loss, the years of waiting. It all made sense now. Every unanswered prayer, every lonely night, every battle had led to this, a family not built by chance, but by faith. And as the fire crackled softly and the stars shimmered above, Chuck whispered with a smile, "Some miracles don't come to those who fight the hardest. They come to those who never stop believing." Years passed. The little house on the hill that once echoed with silence was now alive with laughter, footsteps, and the sound of dreams being built. Chuck Norris had grown older, his hair now streaked with silver, but his spirit was as strong as ever. His life had slowed down. No more movie sets, no more training montages, no more lights and cameras. But every morning he still woke up before sunrise, brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world he'd fought so hard to protect. Beside him, on the kitchen counter, were two photos, one of Maria at her graduation, holding her art degree proudly in her hands, and the other, a recent picture of his wife Rebecca and their 6-year-old son, Ethan, smiling on the front porch. 3 miracles. 3 reasons to keep smiling. One sunny afternoon, Maria returned home from the city for a visit. She had become a professional illustrator. Her work now featured in children's books and charity campaigns around the world. As she stepped through the old wooden door, she found her father sitting in his rocking chair, polishing his cowboy hat, the same one he wore the day he found her. "Still got that old hat, huh?" she teased, setting her bag down. Chuck grinned. "This hat's seen more miracles than most people ever will." She laughed and hugged him tightly. "You never change." "Neither do you, kiddo," he replied softly. They sat together in the backyard under the oak tree where Maria used to draw when she was younger. Ethan ran around them chasing butterflies, his laughter echoing through the air. "Dad," Maria began, looking out at the open sky, "I've been invited to host an art show in New York. They want me to showcase drawings from my Hope collection, the ones inspired by my life here." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "The ones about us?" Maria nodded. "About you? About what you did for me," he smiled. "I didn't do anything special, I just couldn't walk away." Maria looked at him, her voice trembling. "That's what makes it special." A few weeks later, Chuck and Rebecca flew to New York to see Maria's exhibition. The gallery was full of people, artists, critics, and families. But at the center of the room hung a large painting titled, "The Day He Found Me." It showed a man, weary, kind and strong, standing in a snow-covered train station, his coat wrapped around a freezing young girl. The crowd stood silently before it, some with tears in their eyes. As Chuck read the description beneath it, his throat tightened, This painting is dedicated to the man who found me when I was lost. Not just in the world, but in life. He taught me that love isn't something you're given. It's something you choose every single day. Chuck turned toward Maria. She smiled softly, her eyes shimmering. It's all true, Dad. He put his arm around her shoulders. You've made me proud, kiddo. That night, after the event, they all went back to the hotel. Chuck stepped out onto the balcony, gazing down at the lights of the city. Rebecca came up beside him. Thinking again? He chuckled. Always, she leaned against him. You ever wonder how different things would have been if you hadn't stopped that night at the station? Chuck looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. No, because that night I didn't just rescue her. She rescued me. Rebecca rested her head on his shoulder. You gave her a family. He shook his head. She gave us one. Years later, long after Chuck had passed on peacefully, Maria stood once more at that same train station, now renovated and bustling with life. In her hands, she held a small bronze plaque. She knelt near a quiet corner of the platform and placed it on the wall. It read, "In memory of the man who believed love could heal anything, Chuck Norris, protector, father, and friend." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "You kept your promise, Dad. You never stopped fighting for hope." Behind her, Ethan, now a teenager, placed a single white rose beneath the plaque. "Mom," he said softly, "I want to join the foundation you started. I want to help kids too, just like Grandpa did." Maria smiled through tears. Then his legacy lives on. As they walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the platform in golden light. Somewhere in the echo of the wind, Maria swore she heard a familiar voice, unsteady, calm, and proud. "Keep going, kiddo. You've got this." She smiled, looking up toward the sky. And in that moment she knew. Love had truly conquered everything.